When I was in 10th grade, I had a crush on a girl from one of my classes. She was a shyer girl who enjoyed things more like books and television as opposed to things like fashion and sports. After talking to her for a bit, she recommended 2 shows to me that she really enjoyed from Japan. Wanting to impress her, I followed her recommendation and watched the 2 anime she recommended. The first, I didn't have a lot of interest in, and watched it more out of being polite than anything else. Surprisingly, I found myself to enjoy its harsh world and its main character's raw passion. The anime was Attack on Titan, and is now one of my favorite animes of all time. The second anime I watched, I was a lot more hopeful for, but by episode 2, I found the main character to be annoying, and I never watched Sword Art Online again. In hindsight, this encounter was probably my first real drop into the anime rabbit hole, if you don't count shows like Kirby, Sonic X, and Pokemon, which I had watched as a kid. The line between anime fan and non-anime fan is starting to thin every day. With anime becoming more mainstream, normies are getting more and more willing to try anime. These are the best anime that you can show someone who's getting into anime, or if you yourself are just getting into it. Since no group can be easily defined, however, I want to go over certain interests that you or your friend might have beforehand, in order to help determine what might be the best first anime for them. We all have that one bookworm friend, the guy or girl that prefers to spend their time reading face down in a book than anything social or physical. More specifically, we all know that one fantasy reader that could cite their favorite book series as Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, and The Ranger's Apprentice. Anime has a lot of fantasy series, but most of them are isekai. The Japanese fantasy genre has its own stereotypes and plot structures, making them somewhat familiar but different. While this is no lesser or greater than Western-style fantasy, for a fantasy anime with a more Western style, I would recommend Little Witch Academia. Little Witch's magical aspects are very similar to Harry Potter, as both characters attend a magic school and get into hijinks thanks to their magic, such as things of talking to those who have passed on, or using their magic in order to become somebody else. The animation also introduces a level of familiarity, as Little Witch is animated to be less detailed and more expressive, making it similar to many American and Canadian cartoons of the early 2000s. Unlike its predecessor Kill la Kill, it avoids fan service, which can be seen as a huge turnoff for many new fans. The episodes are episodic, so you can pick it up easily at any time, and it being on Netflix makes it easy to access without the need of a new streaming platform. Marvel movies have become somewhat of a staple over here in the West. Even people who weren't comic book fans before have found themselves to be fans of these movies, and it almost even changed the industry, with the term of calling something a Marvel movie having significant value. These movies are mostly action movies, but I feel there's something a lot of people don't talk about with them. Marvel movies have to balance a lot of characters with very minimal screen time, especially in flicks like The Avengers and the characters that are introduced in those flicks. In order to do this, it fits characters into archetypes and then gives them a moment of character development. This allows them to handle these giant cast of characters without making any one character feel robbed, or without upsetting a fan of that character. This has its advantages too if you don't have a character that you like going into the movie, since it gives a lot of characters you're more than likely going to be able to relate to one. My Hero Academia does the same thing too, but I'm willing to bet you already thought of that one. So, as a good alternative, I would recommend Dr. Stone. Much like My Hero, it juggles multiple characters by forcing them each to have their own archetype and giving them a scene to shine in. Each character fits their own niche, and not one character is good at everything. Although it's true it's a lot less action-based than My Hero Academia or Marvel movies, it replaces this action with science in order to make up a lot of the filler that would be replaced with fight scenes. This is not only a good way to make the fight scenes a lot more interesting, it helps give a unique idea that's not normally seen. It also avoids fan service again, and while the power levels are a bit questionable at points, it manages to do the entire series without being too absurd, as most of the things are based in science and believable. For any Marvel fan, I would highly suggest Dr. Stone. American crime drama shows are a huge staple, which include shows like NCIS, Law & Order, and many other. These shows love to show the dark elements of human morality and human fragility. Crime, violence, and other heinous acts are some of the show's favorite elements. Crime also has a way of getting into our media, as we've had stories that feature gang, syndicates, and other morally questionable groups. These stories are filled with dark elements and have plot armor almost completely removed, and a gritty sense of realism. For somebody who might like one of these, I would recommend 91 Days. The main plot is circled around revenge and features a lot of death, assassination, and other shady acts. Taking place in the Prohibition era of the 1920s, its story takes inspiration from American history and mafia stories. The gritty, realistic tone of the show is presented in everything that it does, and even in its weird moments, it's human and realistic. Characters are expendable, and the plot armor doesn't even exist in the show, something that I'm sure any cynical friend that enjoys dark content would appreciate. Hey Mom and Dad, let's watch an anime. If that's not a phrase that scares you, I don't know what will. If you're like me, you grew up in a family that really didn't understand why their adult son is still watching cartoons, but are loving and kind enough to want to understand why. Sometimes the parents even want to engage in their children's interest, and that's great to a point. There's no doubt parents are some of the toughest customers. Not only do they come from a completely different time with different tastes and morals, but because impressing them is normally pretty important to you, and you don't want to creep them out. For them, I would recommend Erased. The anime is a mystery drama focusing on an adult sent back in time in his younger self's body. While this seems like it could lead to a lot of yabe moments, it actually results in a wholesome and dramatic show. Each step of the way you are rooting for these underdogs as their death means so little to anybody else outside their circle. You get to watch the characters develop as the main character grows up, the female lead learns to open up, and the mom becomes a more responsible person. One of the big things is it avoids anything that would alienate Western audiences and avoid sexualization altogether, making this anime the ultimate married man's choice. Sadly, it's not perfect and suffers from two big flaws. First, the main villain is supposed to be hidden, but it's really obvious when you're watching the show. Second, the ending feels rushed and is pretty incomplete, which can scar your viewing experience of the series, since the ending means a lot on how you think of a series afterwards. That being said, it has a very conclusive ending, and ignoring the other elements that I mentioned before, it's a great anime that I would recommend. Chances are, you have that one friend that you wouldn't call a normie, but you also wouldn't call them a weeb. They're into Naruto, My Hero Academia, and other similar shonen. Their taste could be described as mainstream, but they're looking to get into more abstract things, like slice-of-life anime. Slice of life, however, is an intimidating genre to get into, since its appeal is hard to explain and basically comes down to the characters doing nothing. Yet it remains a staple in Japanese media due to its charms. For them, I would recommend Working. While it's not the best slice-of-life anime by no means, it's focused on comedy, which allows it to be a consistent source of entertainment while you get to know the characters and grow attached to them. It mostly starts out using these comedic elements, but slowly introduces slice-of-life elements until it completely elapses the comedy aspect and grabs the viewer's attention. It's a much-needed transition into the slice-of-life genre. It was actually my first slice-of-life anime, and for the good Christian boys, it doesn't indulge in any fan service. The plot hook of the story is broad and makes it relatable to those who watch it over multiple cultures and races, and its over-exaggeration of character archetypes is more similar to cartoons seen in the West. Mob Psycho 100 is a good general anime if you don't have anything specific in mind. It lacks a lot of elements that alienates Western audiences, yet things can get weird and colorful. But don't get me wrong, the weird character designs are probably more cartoony and can relate easier to Western audiences. The silliness of the characters aren't referential to other anime or to Japanese culture in general, making them a good segue into Japanese-style humor. it also uses these bold colors in fight scenes specifically, giving these beautiful spectacles whenever two characters are fighting, making them more memorable. There's no fan service in the anime, and the quality is a lot more stable than its other recommended work by One Punch Man. Mob Psycho is a coming-of-age story about a kid who's born with powerful psychic abilities. Despite this, he doesn't really view himself as being superior to others, but almost the opposite. He doesn't really even view it as a gift either. What's unique about this anime is the way it talks about gifts and powers and what it means to use them with real maturity. Avoiding the story of use your power for good, it focuses more on personal character perspective. What makes this story great for normies is that such a unique story idea that has no real brother or sister in the West to compare it to.